At the end of the day, you may choose to do something less than that, and that's part of the discussion. And then we have to rationalize from one bylaw to the next. If the money gets taken, put into reserves, it can only be used for the purposes you collected for. So moving from one bylaw to the next, I have to consider reserve fund balances and rationalize things. We have a net cost then. Mandatorily, you must look and see the benefit between residential and non-residential growth. So I have to split the cost between those different benefits. And then we divide it back through the growth to come up with the development charge. For residential, we have a low density, basically singles and semi-detached, medium density housing, which is basically townhouses, high densities, which are apartments. And then on non-residential, we represent the charge on a per square foot basis. And that's pretty well standard across Ontario. Now there's certain cases where you, as a municipality, even though you may want to, you can't impose the charge. You can't impose the charge on, if you have an existing industrial building and you're going to expand that building, the first 50% of the expansion, you can't impose the charge. 100,000 square foot industrial building, they have 50,000, they could be a very high water, very high wastewater user, whatever, you still can't impose the charge. Once they exceed that, anything in excess of it, you can impose. For housing, they've got, to some extent, an intensification provision here. For the for singles and semi-detached, you can add 2 additional bedrooms, as long as it meets with the planning requirements. You can add two additional apartments, two additional apartments, as long as you don't more than double the size of the single-family home. And if you've got a medium density, so townhouse or apartments, you can add 1 additional unit and no charges payable. The last one is kind of a local government exemption, so that you as a municipality can't impose a charge on the county or on school boards. So if they build a new school, you can't charge them. And similarly, they can have bylaws and they can't charge you on your buildings. So it's kind of a quid pro quo. I don't charge you, you don't charge me. Then we get into an area where you, as a municipality, can take a look at these calculated charges and decide in certain instances that you want to make discretionary exemptions or reductions. So you can reduce the charge, we do a calculated charge, you can reduce it in whole, so you can knock it down to 0, or reduce it in part. I'm only going to charge 50% of what Gary calculated. And you can do that either by different types of development or different classes of development. So a lot of times things like bona fide farms or churches are normally probably the 2 most often exempted types of developments across Ontario. And a lot of times you may see a reduction for industrial or even elimination of that. They may charge the commercial and institutional, but reduce or not charge the industrial. The charge is going up significantly. You can choose to phase it in over time. That's admissible. And then this last one, which is called a redevelopment credit. It is something that you're not going to find in the Act. If you can read it all you want, you're not going to see where there's a redevelopment credit, because really it's arisen through case law. You go to the Ontario Municipal Board, you set a ruling, and we've always embraced this. It's always something that we've been doing these things even while we did all the major cases back in the lot levy days. But something we always recognized is if your house burns down and you've got to replace it, you should be able to replace it without paying a development charge. Now, that only lasts for a period of time. Most municipalities in Ontario provide a 5-year window to rebuild. Okay, so that if you knock it down, and there's a couple of reasons for that. I mean, you know, somebody could come. You don't have a time period on it. Somebody could come with a picture of a farmhouse that was there 150 years ago and say, I should get an exemption. Well, obviously, the services have changed since then, and as well over time. I mean, there's the extra capacity ends up being absorbed into the system as you move into the future. Now, these are the current exemptions that are contained within the municipality's bylaw. So place of worship or cemetery, burial ground are exempted. Public hospitals are exempt, so if you build a new hospital here, charges aren't there. Non-residential farm buildings, lands used for university or colleges, temporary buildings or structures, so if you build it and you take it down within a year, no charge is payable. And then buildings that are generally incidental to residential uses are not included. So you could have a detached garage, you wouldn't pay the charge. And obviously the last two are the mandatory we talked about. Can't charge the Board of Educations, and then any local board at a county wouldn't be imposed the charge. Now, there's some additional exemptions that talked about with council, and they're contained within the bylaw. Within the core business areas of Grand Band, Forest, Edford, or Kona, there's a reduced charge. So, and we've provided the maps, and we've provided for a reduction of the charge if there's any development within those particular areas. Agricultural processing establishments, for the most part, if you're hooked into the water system, we've provided for the water charge to be charged, but no other services. Water services, obviously, there's a high draw in the system. You've invested quite heavily on that, so a charge would be imposed. Greenhouses, we've had some discussions, tried to make a distinction between greenhouses. Large-scale farm type of greenhouses would be exempted from all services except roads, fire, admin, and water, and the charge would be imposed at the commercial institutional rate. Wind turbines would be charged a single detached rate equivalent for roads, fire, and administration. So those are contained within the bylaws. I'll come back to those and show and go through in detail on what it means, phase in and stuff like that. So I've got a slide for each one of these as we move through. So I'll come back to revisit those in a couple of minutes. I've already talked about local service. Just keep in mind that the way the Act is set up, Section 59 says the developers have responsibility for costs. Over and above those costs is what we contain in the DC. So there's a two-part. And there's basically a guideline, a local service guideline that's contained within the DC report. So we talk about all these things, and all councils get faced with a process. Obviously, nobody likes to pay charges, but we can then get faced with having to make decisions on who does pay. If you have growth, what happens over time? I'll start with sewer and water. At a certain point, you don't have capacity, and if you don't have water capacity, you can't build. And you have to provide the capacity, you have to provide the pipe. If you have to build it, or you have built it, and you've got the capacity there, then your choice is, who pays? Do you have the existing taxpayer pay, so they put out the money, and they're going to, to some extent, subsidize new future homeowners that are coming in? Or do you take the cost and proportion it and put it onto the development charge? Or do you do something like those? I mean, there's no magic. As you go through all services, same type of thing. I mean, maybe you don't want to provide any more recreation facilities, and that's fine. Over time, what happens though, it becomes harder and harder and harder to get your kids into different programming because there's no more capacity in those programs, and it really starts to come to the fold that deficiencies in the system. So you can reduce your service standards, and that would have no impact on these, but has an impact on the use or the enjoyment that you get from these programs. So, as I say, across Ontario, I always have chit chats with councils because it's kind of something that you have to balance off. As I say, you don't have to have a charge, but then the impacts are here. If you do have a charge, you've got to figure out how you pay for it. Or, sorry, if you do have service levels, you have to figure out how to pay for it. Quickly, growth forecast is contained within appendix, is discussed in chapter 3 and is detailed in